We want to welcome you today to today's video. I've asked Dr. Mario Fucineri to join us. We've got some questions about the new ABN form, and so we wanted to clear some things up. Thanks for making time, Doctor.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, even if it's across the airwaves.
So, hey, really quick to kind of kick things off regarding the ABN form and some of the changes that took place, even though there weren't a whole lot of changes. When we get down to it, what are some of the misconceptions with Medicare billing as they kind of pertain to the ABN form?
Well, thank you, Mark, and great question to start off with, actually, because this is one of the misconceptions that I deal with all the time. In fact, I got a call from a doctor yesterday, says, I do cash. And I said, well, do you see Medicare eligible patients? And she said, well, yeah, but we do cash. And I said, well, keep this in mind, and here is the source of this. Opting out of Medicare is not an option for doctors of chiropractic. Note that opting out and being non-par versus par are not the same thing. So keep in mind that in Medicare you have participating provider and a non-participating provider. The way to think about it is a participating provider is in network with Medicare, and a non-par is out of network, but you still have to participate. And that's why I don't like those terms, but they never asked me about it here. So basically, as a chiropractor, chiropractors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, we cannot opt out of Medicare, which means that if you are doing covered service, and for us it's pretty easy because it's spinal manipulation. So as long as you are performing active care, then, and you'll see down at the bottom of the screen here, the claim can be filed no later than 1 year from which the service was furnished, which means you have 1 year. Now, what's interesting in our talk here today is that a patient doesn't have to have a covered service to request that it get filed with Medicare. An example would be if a patient needs a denial from Medicare on any service in order for another insurance to possibly pick it up. And so that's really up to the patient. You know what, the patient can be just a pain in the piriformis and just say, I want you to file it anyway with Medicare because they don't trust whomever you included. And so now they can request it. This is an important fact. Even if the patient signs the ABN form, which we'll be talking about here today, they have up to 1 year to request that it gets sent in. And so even if they say don't send it in, and then later they change their mind, then you have to send it in.
So let me follow it up with a different question. When we start talking about this ABN form, it centers around maintenance. So, what is maintenance, and how does that play into the ABN form?
Okay. Well, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let me give you a picture. Okay. I don't know, I'm going to give you two options here. This is the gluten option, and then we have the gluten-free, okay? So, keep in mind what I refer to as an episode of care. Think of a loaf of bread like we have here, okay? At the beginning, this is the initial encounter, which doesn't mean the patient has to be a new patient. It's just initiating active care for that patient, which could be a new injury or an exacerbation. And that would, of course, correspond to box 14. Now, if every slice of this bread here is a treatment, well, then somewhere, after about a month or so, it doesn't have to be a month, but somewhere around there, we're going to do a reevaluation. When the patient finally reaches MMI, maximum medical improvement. Now, maximum medical improvement is when you have two reevaluations essentially unchanged, okay? And that is when the patient is at MMI. Now, the gluten-free, another way to look at that is think of it like if you're taking a trip. The whole road, the whole path that you're going to set, the whole route, that is your initial is when you start off here, and the road is your treatment plan. So we're going along on the treatment plan, and then invariably we're going to have to stop. And so we pull over and go to a rest area, which is basically your re-exam. And here, you kind of reset your treatment goals and everything, and then get back on the road. Now, when you finally reach your destination of where the patient is at MMI, now that is the whole episode of care, all right? So when you think about it here, Medicare, the mandate with Medicare for us is that Medicare, number one, only pays for items or services that are reasonable and necessary for the diagnosis and or treatment of illness or injury to improve the functioning of a malformed body member. So when you think about it here, function is where it's at, okay? And that's why, and I know this is the ABN form, but just hang with me here, because when that patient ceases to progress in functional improvement, that's when you reach MMI, okay? So how do you determine functional loss? Well, you talk to the patient, their history and everything, of course, outcome assessment tests as well. So when you look at what Medicare says for medical necessity, the patient has to have a significant health problem in the form of a neuromusculoskeletal condition. Well, functional loss, I mean, think about it here, it's 65 and older or disabled people who are on Medicare, right? So that's your outcome assessment test. Number two, you must have a reasonable expectation of recovery or improvement of function. And so now that's your treatment goals, if you will, all right? And then lastly, of course, the patient has to have a subluxation. Now, as we go along in the treatment here of the patient, there are really three types of subluxations to look at here. And again, this all goes to when does that patient go to maintenance care? And that is one of the difficult things as doctors, because patients may always have pain of some type, but it doesn't mean they're improving. Now maybe they hit a plateau, okay? And so when you look at the types of subluxation in a Medicare case, you have the acute subluxation, which is basically treatment for a new injury. It's self-limiting, short-lived, you don't expect residuals, everything will be cool. But look at chronic subluxation. A patient's condition is considered chronic when it's not expected to completely resolve, but where the continued therapy can be expected to result in some functional improvement. That is a very significant statement there. So think of our patients here with a chronic subluxation. A chronic subluxation example might be degenerative disc disease, spinal stenosis, scoliosis. You're not necessarily going to cure it, but you're going to quiet it down, number one, and then improve their function. So let's think of DDD, degenerative disc disease. A patient's condition is considered chronic, or DDD is considered chronic and it's not expected to completely resolve, but where the continued therapy can be expected to result in some functional improvement. And then the next statement, once the functional status has remained stable, plateaued, for a given condition, MMI, further treatment is considered maintenance therapy. Now, the patient may have a flare-up and you don't change the diagnosis, but they have an exacerbation, and you're going to change box 14 with that exacerbation, but it's a temporary, but it's a significant or marked deterioration of the patient's activities of daily living. You see, it's all about the function. So when we look at maintenance care now, the subheadings of maintenance care is number one, maintenance therapy includes services that seek to prevent disease, promote health, prolong and enhance quality of life. That is wellness care. Patient says, I feel fine, I feel great, I haven't felt this good in years. Number two is to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition. And so again, supportive care, once you reach them at MMI, to keep them afloat, well, Medicare says, they got to come in every 3 weeks. We're not going to pay for that. And you know what? No other insurance does, okay? And again, when further clinical improvement cannot reasonably be expected from continuing or continuous ongoing care, the treatment, becomes supportive and therefore is considered to be maintenance care. Okay. Now, we have different ways to communicate with any carrier, any third party at all. And these on CPT codes are called modifiers, okay? A modifier, a CPT modifier, basically indicates that a service has been performed, but it's different. There's something you should know about this service, okay? And so it gives us information. Now, they could be alphabetic, AT, it could be numeric, 25, or it could be a combination like Q6, okay? So there's always 2 digits, but whichever one affects the payment of that product or service, in this case here, they go first, okay? All right, so as example, the modifier, like if you think about in Medicare is pretty easy compared to other insurances, but Medicare, it covers only spinal manipulation. And, we're trying to get legislation. Please talk to your legislator, give to PAC. But we're trying to get legislation with HR 3654 to get Medicare to pay for everything. And you might be thinking, gee, why doesn't it cover exam? They require it, but it doesn't cover it. Therapy, whatever. And that's why on any service that you do, other than spinal manipulation, it gets a GY modifier, okay? Now, think of this here. Any therapy, physical therapy code, PT, typically will start with a 97. Like 97110, 97112, okay? Those 97 codes, those are physical therapy codes. Well, even though Medicare doesn't cover it, if it's going into their system, you got to talk to their computer and saying, oh, by the way, this is therapy on an outpatient basis, but it's not going to be covered, because we know you don't cover anything for chiropractors other than spinal manipulation. So therefore, anytime you're doing a therapy code like 97110, you not only put a GY modifier, but you actually put GPGY. GP, physical therapy, outpatient, GY, not covered, okay? Well, then you have the GZ, of course, which that's when an ABN form should have been signed, but you didn't get it signed, which, geez, you're nuts if you use this, because Medicare audits 100% of it. And then GA, it doesn't mean this. Nobody has that much logic. But if you think about it here, GA, I always say, think of got ABN. That's what it kind of stands for, okay? So when you have an ABN form signed for spinal manipulation, you're going to use the GA modifier on the spinal manipulation, you see? Now the AT, of course, is active care, all right? Okay, so that brings us to our talk, okay? The ABN form, all right? I know you've been waiting, but here it is. Let me explain this to you, and it'll make life easier, okay? I've had, I remember one patient that came in, I'll call her Millie. Millie, 82 years old, she's having a reevaluation. I said, Millie, how are you feeling today? And she said, I feel great. I said, are you having any pain? She said, no, I have zero pain. I mean, nothing. And I said, how old are you? 82. Did you ever think at 82 you would feel fine? She goes, and see, that way I make her think about like what we did. And I said, and now for the rest of the story, I said, Millie, look out the window here. You see behind me here? Look at the window. And she goes, oh, it's beautiful out there. I said, yeah, that's Wellness World. It's kind of like the Garden of Eden, okay? She goes, hey, I want to go. I want to go. And I said, wait a second. In order to get to Wellness World, you need a passport. And the passport is the ABN form. Okay. Now, by the way, if she went there, okay, if she tripped and fell and she comes back to me, now she's active care, we go back to an AT. But very important to realize here is that once she's at MMI again, 2 visits, 3 visits, whatever it takes clinically, now to go back to Wellness World, now she needs another passport, okay? Which means every time you go from active care to wellness care, that ABN form tells the patient there's a liability. And that's what it is. The ABN form is a limit on liability, which means it covers you, the doctor, and it covers the patient. It tells, you see, I tell the patient, Medicare is not expected to pay for this, and you're responsible. And this is the service, this is why, and this is about how much it'll cost, you see? And that's what the ABN form does. So now when we dive a little bit into, which will be brief here, but when you look at what Medicare says about giving an ABN form, it says an ABN can remain effective up to 1 year. So that ABN form is good for a year, okay, as long as there's not a new triggering event. Well, triggering event is a new injury, you see? And so what they're saying is it's good for 1 year as long as that patient doesn't have a flare-up or fall or something. But if they have a new episode of care, now you have to AT and then GA. So a good way to put this and train you and your staff is anytime the patient transitions from AT to GA, they need that ABN form letting them know from now on it's not going to get covered. Okay? All right. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the next aspect of this here. Keep in mind for all patients, not just Medicare, you're supposed to, scan or copy their insurance card and their government issued photo ID, okay? So it could be a driver's license or a passport, something like that, as long as there's a photo ID, okay? Now, train your staff. Look at the card. You see, if it says John L. Smith III, that's the way you want to put it in the computer system. That's exactly the way you want to put it on the ABN form. In fact, Medicare says that if their name is John L. Smith III, and you put just John L. Smith on the ABN form, that's a different John Smith, and therefore the ABN form is on the insurance card, then that's what you put on the ABN form, in the computer, everything else. Okay, now, every 3 to 5 years, the government says we're going to take a look at the ABN form and see if we need to update anything there, okay? And that's why we just came out with a new ABN form. Now, depending on when you're watching this here, the new ABN form actually takes effect on January 1st, 2021. However, you can start using it now. And so, rather than having your patients sign the old ABN form at the end of 2020, and then January 1st, they sign it again. Remember, it's good for up to a year. Well, you can have them sign it today. And once they sign it today, it's good for another year. Okay? So when we look at ABN form here, keep in mind that on the bottom, okay, and I gave you the website, the link here as far as how to go. There's even ABN forms in Spanish. There's large print ABN forms, okay? But it has to have the expiration 6/30/2023. Guess what happens June 30th, 2023? That's right. Okay, Mark and Mario will be doing another, webinar here, okay? All right, so when you look at the ABN form, and, I know a lot of you are thinking, I know, but I will tell you, I get calls from my groupies, and they go, Mario, I was audited, and sure, I'm so dumb, okay? You always tell us, watch that heading on the ABN form, and sure enough, they get caught there. That's the most common mistakes on the ABN form. okay? So when you look at that ABN form, the clinic name or the doctor name, you can put your logo up there at the top, okay? The clinic address, city, state, zip, and your telephone number. One doctor forgot their zip code, one doctor forgot their telephone number, and they both had to pay back money, okay? So you'll see that in our example here, as an example where it says patient name. Now you could take that A out of there, but the name, which your staff can write in the name there, is exactly as it appears on the card, okay? So keep in mind, tell your staff exactly as it was on their Medicare card, that's how you put it in there. The identification number is optional and never, now we've done away with Social Security numbers. That's called the MBI number. And so that MBI number, Medicare Beneficiary Identifier, MBI is protected just like a Social Security number, and you don't put the Social Security number on a claim form, use the MBI number, but on the ABN form, you don't put the Social Security number or the MBI where it says identification number. It's optional, and that's more for internal use, your office. You can put an account number. Frankly, we leave it blank, okay? All right, so header, patient's name, exactly as it appears on the card, identification number, just leave it blank, okay? Now, as you look through the ABN form, you'll see the letter D and then there's a blank. So anywhere, go through from starting at top to bottom and look there and you will see these blanks here and you put the word services in there, okay? I want the services listed above, all right? It just fits in there, and actually you'll see when you go to that link that I gave you there, they have the ABN form in Microsoft Word, so you can edit it as you wish, all right? Don't change the wording. I don't like this word, too bad, okay? All right, and so you put that in there. Now, there are three options. Option one, the patient's saying, I want you to file it. Option two, don't file it. Option three, I don't want the service and I don't want you to file it, which then you don't do it, okay? So option one and option two has to be personally marked by the patient. Don't have it pre-marked for patients. You cannot coerce them. If you want to be a patient here, you got to hit option two. No, don't do that, okay? All right? So the key is option one or option two, all right? Now remember, I told you the patient can change their mind here up to a year. Typically, they're not. Now, why would a patient want you to file a a spinal manipulation? Okay, well, they want you to file a spinal manipulation because maybe another insurance, a secondary insurance, such as like Blue Cross might cover it, okay? And that secondary insurance is like maybe from their employer, okay, or a different policy that they have, okay? Now, the signature there has to be personally signed by the patient or their authorized representative, and the date must be personally written by the patient. I had one office there, they got in big trouble there, and it was because they were stamping the date. And it's like, Medicare says you might have them sign it, and it's not that Medicare doesn't trust you, but they don't trust you, okay? They're looking out for the patient, number one. Now, when we go back to that ABN form, and I'll talk about non-ABN, but you see in the middle there where it says D, okay? So right up here, if you see my cursor right there. Then you put the word services right there. You're going to put in spinal manipulation. Then you put, Medicare does not pay for maintenance care. And then the estimated cost, you could put in 98940 for 142, whatever it is at that time, okay? Just like down here, the D, services, okay? And just do that, all right? Now, as far as the cost is concerned, that has to be within 125%. So you can't tell them $100 and then it actually turns out to be $300, okay? Now, obviously, spinal manipulation won't be 100 or 300. Otherwise, we'd all be, living from the Garden of Eden, okay? Now, saying that, okay, Medicare always says that the ABN form is mandatory for spinal manipulation, but it's voluntary for non-covered services. Well, what does that mean, voluntary? Only when you dig in to the instruction manual, it says it may be used, ABN form may be used instead of the NEMB form. And people go, what's the NEMB form? Okay, it's the Notice of Exclusion of Medicare Benefits. Don't even worry about it, because even Medicare says, you know what, you can put it on letterhead. So for your non-covered services, that goes on a form, typically other than an ABN form, because, and I'm just a reporter here, okay? Medicare says the patient should know what's covered and not covered, okay? And then you and I lie. So the key is inform the patient in writing what's not covered and the price, and you can give them a range like with your exam, okay? And then put it down. And I have the patient sign it. Always give them a copy of whatever they sign. That way they cannot say they didn't get it, okay? All right. Now, we have participating providers. Everything I've said so far is participating. Non-par, you're still a non-participating provider. You're still held to the same guidelines, and you still have to file for active care or when the patient needs a denial or request that you file a claim, okay? All right, so the non-par ABN form is a little bit different here, okay? And when we look at that non-par ABN form, under option 1, you're gonna cross out, if Medicare does pay, you will refund any payments I made to you, less copay or deductibles. Why? Well, typically a non-par doctor is not paid by Medicare. Now, if you look on box 13 and you have 2127, 27, do you accept assignment, yes or no? Well, a par doctor, yes. Non-par, typically no, unless for that claim and that claim alone, you want Medicare to pay you, the doctor. Patient says, I just can't afford this. I'm on a fixed income, right? And so therefore, in cases where the patient pays you up front and then the patient is reimbursed, you're going to cross that off, okay? And so you can do that in that you could even do it in your font and just do a strike through. That's what it's called, strike through. Now look at box H. This is very important, okay? I've had doctors say to me, do I have to do that wording? You can change it and let me know how it works out on audit. Yeah, you do that wording. That's what they gave you. This supplier, yeah, we're sometimes referred to as suppliers, does not accept payment from Medicare for the items listed in the table up above, okay? If I checked option 1 above, I am responsible for paying the supplier charge for the items directly to the supplier. If Medicare does pay, Medicare will pay me the Medicare approved amount for the items, okay? So for non-par doctors, that's a difference, okay? All right, so the big thing this year with the new ABN form was not only the non-par portion, which is, just a re-emphasis of that, but also something called the QMB. So non-par, this is what you're gonna change right here. But the QMB is different. And whether you're par or non-par, listen to me. This affects all of us, okay? All right. A qualified Medicare beneficiary. Okay, I have a slide on it, but I want to get your attention first so you listen to me, okay? There is a classification of a Medicare patient. It has nothing to do with Medicaid. A classification of a Medicare patient where, think of it as a hardship case. That hardship case there is where they're making below $11,200 per year, okay? And so therefore, Medicare will tell or designate that patient as a qualified Medicare beneficiary. In that case, then you will not collect from the Medicare patient any deductible, any copay for covered services, only for covered. So spinal manipulation, QMB patient, they don't pay anything out of pocket. You have to take what is accepted, what is paid from Medicare. So how that affects you, especially at the beginning of the year, if they have not met their deductible, yeah, you have to eat it until the deductible. Now, obviously, patients go to other doctors other than just us a lot of times, but, you know, frankly, they're very few. I have not had any doctors, and maybe you have, I haven't come upon any doctors, any chiropractors who have actually had a QMB patient. But that qualified Medicare beneficiary, you're going to cross these out as well, because Medicare then is not going to, the patient's not going to pay anything up in front, okay, up ahead, okay? So that QMB, people with Medicare who are in the QMB program, how do you know that they're in the QMB program? The provider enrollment chain, chain of service there, PICOs, all right, chain of ownership there. That PICOs, you can look that up, or when you file that first claim, it'll come back and it'll have a code there, a remittance code that says, don't be collecting from this patient, they're a QMB patient, okay? So Medicare providers may not bill people in the QMB program for Medicare deductibles, co-insurance, co-pay, but state Medicaid programs may pay for those costs. Obviously in Illinois, you know, it's not covered, and so therefore you're just going to have to eat it, okay? So the big difference this year with this new ABN form, they re-emphasized the non-par doctor ABN form, and then they also said, don't forget about the QMB program, because now, last year, the QMB was really introduced completely, and now they're just reminding, okay?
So Dr. Fucinari, you know, you talked to us about QMBs. We've been talking about the ABN form. With this new ABN form, were there specific changes to it in the instructions for qualified Medicare beneficiaries?
Well, actually, Mark, that's a great question, because two things here. Number one, with now think of the ABN form for non-par doctors. Now, what we added in here is a further strikeout, because if you look at the strikeout here with option 1, you may ask to be paid now, but I want Medicare billed. So the doctor is not going to be asked to be paid now, number 1. And then if you drop down 2 more lines here, I understand that Medicare doesn't pay, I am responsible for payment, but I can appeal to Medicare by following all that right there. That is still crossed off. So basically, option 1 for the QMB patient says, bill Medicare and let me know what they say. Okay, that's the big difference there. Does that make sense?
It does. And I also think, just so you know, I think in how their QMBs are being instructed by Medicare and by the carriers is they're telling them to actually check box 1. So I think behind the scenes, you know, the things that we don't necessarily see, but the letters that go out to their QMBs, they're telling them if they're handed an ABN form that they should check option 1.
Right, and don't be confused. There's saying to check option 1 for the QMB patient, because
Correct.
It goes into their data analysis. You
right.
See, it's the data there. So now, what if you have a QMB patient and you're a non-par doctor? Then for sure you want to have not only this cross off right here, but make sure that box H is all filled in too, as we previously discussed. Okay.
Very good. Well, thank you, Doctor. Does that cover everything that we wanted to cover today?
It does. And you know, if anybody watching this has any questions, or, number one, you can always call ICS if you're a member, and staff and Mark, of course, is there to take care of you. If you want, send me an email, doc@askmario.com, and in the subject line, just put something about the ABN webinar, and you have a follow-up question, and we'll be happy to help you out. Anything else, Mark?
No, that's it. Thanks for taking the time with us, Doc, and we look forward to our next conversation.
Great, thank you.